What is the difference between winning and losing? What is the difference between getting what you want in life and not getting what you want in life? What is the difference between this and this? The reality is, so many times in life, we are that close to getting what we need, but we don't realize that. The difference between those two pictures is very simple. The difference is 1 degree. And tonight, that will be our subject on the power of one. You know, I remember the first time I got to vote in a presidential election. I thought it was so cool, and I went down there and cast my ballot, and it was awesome and all that kind of good stuff. But then I remember going home and watching the returns and seeing millions and millions of votes coming in, and just having this feeling of, you know what? My vote really didn't matter that much. And that's a terrible thing. I pray to God you don't feel that way. I got my head pulled out of my butt pretty quickly on that one, because that's why we have so much voter apathy in America. So many people feel that way. What does my vote matter? Well, let me tell you something. Your vote matters a lot, because if everyone thought my vote doesn't matter, we'd have no one voting. It would be ridiculous. Or you'd only have a certain group of people that was passionate about something voting, and it wouldn't represent the entire democracy. The bottom line is, participation is what this country and what democracies are all about. You've got to go and cast your vote. And I'm not just talking about your vote in a presidential election or in a senatorial election. I'm talking about your vote in everything. See, so many times your letter to a congressman, or your letter to the school board, or your letter to the head coach may be, as you will, if you will, the straw that breaks the camel's back. You know, you may feel like it's insignificant. You may feel like the letter you're writing to the customer service department of the company that you feel as if you were mistreated doesn't really matter, but it does. I promise you, someone is paying attention to that. And maybe your letter isn't the one that breaks the camel's back, but maybe it's the one that's 2 or 3 beforehand. But without yours, that last letter that came in that made the difference, that had the leverage, wouldn't have the leverage. Your letter counts. Everything counts. As they say, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So we've got to get out of this mindset that our vote doesn't matter. You know, we started off by showing you a pan filled with water. And the bottom line is, in the beginning, it's just a pan filled with water. There's nothing to it, because it's at 211 degrees. Now that's pretty doggone hot. And the truth is, if you stuck your finger in the water, you definitely burn it, but it wasn't boiling. If you want it to boil, it's got to go up 1 more degree. Now that's only 1 tiny little stinking insignificant degree, but that 1 degree is what makes the difference from regular water and boiling water. How many times have you seen someone, or maybe you've experienced someone who's fallen through the ice? Okay, you're out there skating around during the winter, and maybe the ice isn't as thick as you'd like to be, and someone falls through. Boy, you talk about a near-death experience, or many people actually die that way. It's very difficult to get somebody up through the ice. Well, you know what? You ask that person if the difference between 31 and 32 degrees matters, the difference in freezing and not freezing, and they'll tell you that 1 degree literally makes all the difference in the world. So many of us see things in big, broad strokes, and we're missing the details. So many of us think that it's the overall picture, but it's not the small detail. And I promise you, it is the small detail. A lot of small details added up together makes the difference. But that's the whole idea, guys. We've got to understand that our detail is the detail that matters. Once again, going back to voting, you know, 1 vote when we're dealing with a Supreme Court issue is massive. 1 vote is enormous. It's a huge, huge deal. Do you remember the Beijing Olympics? Why don't you ask Michael Phelps if he thinks that little things make a big difference? As I recall, he'd only have 7 gold medals and be tied with Mark Spitz if it wasn't for that 1 race. And I believe he won that by a couple hundredths of a second. Do you remember watching that? I remember watching and thinking, oh no, he lost. And when they slowed it down and they showed he won it by just the absolute slightest little bit, there have to be a number of little itty bitty things he did during the course of that race that was the difference between winning and not winning. And that's so much of what happens in life, folks. So much of the small details are going to determine whether you become wealthy or whether you're average, whether you become a victor or whether you're just another also-ran. If you think of effort for a moment, you know, I used to work really, really hard. When I first got out of college, I got a job and I worked really hard, and I barely had enough money to make my minimum credit card payments, to pay my meager rent on my apartment. I remember when my air conditioner and heater broke in my car, I couldn't even afford to fix it. So for the longest time, I was driving around with multiple layers during the winter, and when I was driving in the summer or the spring, I had the windows down going as fast as I could because that was my air conditioning system. I remember I wasn't doing very well, and in my mind, I got depressed because I'm like, man, how much harder can I work? I'm working so hard, and it's just not coming together. My belief was I had to work 10 times harder, which would have been virtually impossible. What I didn't understand, the difference between where I was then effort-wise and where I needed to be, was a little bit more. It wasn't a whole lot more, it was a little bit more. See, when I changed some of my mindset, it wasn't how hard I was working, it was actually how smart or lack of smart I was working at the time. But when I started working smarter and put in a little bit more effort, that was the difference between very average results and making millions and millions of dollars. So many of you are sitting there and you're at a frustrated place. First of all, understand you're not by yourself. A lot of people get frustrated. A lot of people have their water up to 208 degrees, 209 degrees, 210 degrees, and yes, 211 degrees, and they're sitting there. And do you realize there are people, maybe someone who's watching this show right now, that are about to bail because you just can't take it anymore. You've been giving it everything you got. You've been heating up this water, and for goodness sakes, it just won't boil. Well, the bottom line is you may need just one more degree to get your career boiling, to get your project boiling, to get whatever it is you want boiling, and you just can't afford to back up, not even a little bit. If you're pushing a car up a hill, have you ever done that? You push your car up a hill, man, it's exhausting, and you're pushing and pushing and pushing and making very, 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 very minimal headway. But if you let go, if you relax for just a second, what happens? You go all the way back to when you started. See, that's the way life is a lot of times. That's the way business is a lot of times. You push that car and push that car and push that car, and you've got to believe that sooner or later you're going to get to the crest of that hill, and you're not going to have to push as hard because the ground's going to be level. Instead of always going uphill, it's going to be level. But you know what the ultimate answer is? The ultimate answer is sooner or later that hill is going to go back down the opposite direction, and it's going to be just as it was super hard and you put in maximum effort, it seemed like you were going nowhere. It's ironic that if you're willing to put in the effort to push that car up the hill, by the time it starts going down the hill, all of a sudden the money and the abundance is flowing in 10 times, 20 times, 100 times faster than ever, and you're putting in virtually no effort. That's what's on the other side of the mountain, but it may only be a degree or two away. The bottom line is I want you to understand after watching this show that you can't afford the luxury of negative thought. You can't afford to back up just one step. You've just got to keep going. And people go, well, how much longer do I need to go? You need to go until it works. That's the bottom line, because ultimately you either have a victory or you have an excuse. And if you understand that just 1 degree at a time is the way you get the boiling, and you may be closer than you think, then it'll be real easy to make sure you always keep going. And if you always keep going and you maintain the right attitude, then ultimately your career will be boiling and you're going to win. And that's what we're all in the game for. So hopefully that powerful message is something that resonates with you. Make sure you're sharing the show with as many people as you can, folks, because there's a lot of people in the world that need to hear these kinds of messages. And we'll see you again next week on The Power of One.